everyone, welcome to After Class with Ballet for All,
a podcast by two passionate adult ballerinas about all things adult ballet related.
and some random thoughts in between.
We're so glad you're here.
So grab your water bottle
Or a cup of coffee.
and join us for a quick chat after class.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the After Class podcast with Ballet for All. Today, we are so excited to be interviewing Janine Kovac, who is the author of the Nutcracker Chronicles, which comes out on November 12th. And we're going to be talking to her about her journey in the ballet world, dancing the Nutcracker. And this book is really an awesome memoir about her love for ballet and her career. So we're really excited to have her on. Let's get into it. Hello, Janine. Welcome to the podcast. We are so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here.
Your book is just so lovely to read. I loved it every second.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
So if you wouldn't mind, because obviously Yelena and I were lucky enough to get to read the book. We got advanced copies. But for people that haven't read the book yet, would you give them a little background on yourself and what the book is about?
Sure. So my book is called The Nutcracker Chronicles, a fairy tale memoir. And it is the life of a ballet dancer from beginning student to ambitious professional student to professional dancer, and then what happens in retirement. But it's told through the narrative arc of the Nutcracker. So every chapter either takes place, it's the party scene or the battle or snow and what's happening on stage and what's happening backstage at the same time, wherever I am or my family, because my husband dances and my children danced, what role we are dancing on stage, as well as what's going on in our lives behind the scenes.
Especially this time of year. It was just so fun to read about the Nutcracker and the behind the scenes part. And one of the things I was curious about is what was it specifically about the Nutcracker that made you decide to center your memoir and your story around it and to tell it that way?
Well, that's a good question. So I danced in Nutcrackers for many, many years. My husband, as I mentioned, was a ballet dancer, and he danced probably in 20 years worth of Nutcrackers as the Nutcracker Prince and the Mouse King and the Sugar Plum Fairy Cavaliers, and our children danced. And when you have that many different cities and countries and theaters and ballet schools, there's so many really good stories. And some of them are dramatic stories, like somebody gets a concussion on stage, and some of them are silly stories, silly things that we did on stage to entertain ourselves. And there were just so many of them. I felt like they needed to be recorded, and I needed to write down all these stories. And when I did that, it just seemed to make sense to fit it into a meta story of the Nutcracker. And then the through line, I realized, has to be me, because I'm the person who's living out these different roles, both real and metaphorical. And so it just kind of fell into place. The structure fell into place very, very early. And then which stories went with which variation, that took many years to kind of figure out the right order to tell that story.
Yeah, I would imagine that's quite a process of trying to piece it together, almost like a puzzle.
Exactly. Right. And then there's so many great stories about what happened in the Spanish variation or backstage or in snow or Waltz of the Flowers or whatever. So it was like, okay, which one's going to fit in the arc of someone who wants to dance, did dance, still wants to dance, but isn't dancing, and honors that through line and still fits with what's going on in the variations or in the battle, whatever that is.
That's pretty amazing. Even from the first chapter or the overture, when you're describing your experience as a child just watching the Nutcracker, I was that little girl. As I'm reading the book, I'm like, that's exactly how I felt the first time. I was just like leaning over, like my legs hanging out the chair and just like, and I remember telling my family exactly the same, like, I want to dance ballet. My grandma, she's opposing to it, like, you're not going to dance ballet. I mean, 24 years ago. And I remember everyone opposing to it. I'm like, no, I'm going to dance ballet. I want to be there. And it was just such a lovely introduction into the book, like how you have that first experience. And I'm 100% sure, not just professional dancers, but even anyone that has been in the audience watching any ballet felt exactly the same. If they were, what if I was there on the stage dancing for the audience. And it's so great the way you portray that from the audience and then from the stage. Is just amazing.
Well, there's so many of us. There's so many little girls who went and were inspired by what they saw on stage, and that moment sticks with you. It's like a lightning bolt. You're like, oh, I get it. I can do. There are people who are doing that, and I want to be like that.
It's one of my favorite parts about going to the Nutcracker is seeing all the little kids and seeing, the little girls in their dresses and just are so excited to be there. And it's like you kind of get to relive that childhood magic just by seeing the other kids in the audience. And it's just so fun. It's one of the best parts.
At intermission or after the ballet, and they're dancing. They're so excited. They're still dancing and they're running into other people or the banister or the stairs, or they're slipping on the floor or whatever, but they don't care. They're so inspired.
So cute. It's just magical, really. In reference to your time as a teacher, I will take a quote from the book when you say, when my students left the studio, whether it was at the end, either schooling or just at the end of rehearsal, I wanted them to be inspired, not to be damaged. This is something that as a professional ballet dancer, which was trained under a very old school teachers, exactly as how you describe it in your book. You're doing your best, trying your hardest, and your teacher's just looking at you like, is that it? Is that everything? Or you will be doing your best variation ever in a rehearsal, sweating, but super happy with my outcome, and the teachers will be like, yeah, next, or not even acknowledge it, right? And how did you achieve that disassociation from that toxic element of, because it was toxic in a way. I remember when I first started training and teaching, how hard it was for me to realize you don't need to use a lighter on their leg. You don't need to use a needle, or you don't need to have a stick in your hand, right? How did you do that from damaging and not encouraging to being the opposite, to being inspiring?
Well, same. There would be the teacher who would put her head under your leg, and you're not going to kick the teacher in her, on the head because you can't hold your leg up. And then lots of really mean insults, just really unnecessary things, and a lot of body shaming and all that. And so I wasn't the kind of person, it would never occur to me to insult someone but what I did pick up from that toxic environment was you just focus on the students that you thought had potential. And the other ones you just kind of didn't notice, right? You just put so I learned to play favorites from the training that I had. And what really made a difference was when I started teaching adults, because, well, first of all, adults have all these gross motor skills that the little kids don't have, right? They know how to drive, they know how to type, they're coordinated in a way, they know to go to the bathroom before they go to class. There's all this stuff that we don't have to deal with adults, that little kids are spending a lot of time managing. And because they're adults, you're also not looking at potential, I can see where you're going to be in 20 years. You could go and you're really looking at what are we doing right now? And there was so much joy that I had in the adult students because they're showing up after work. They're showing up because they want to. They're paying out of pocket, so that's something that they're budgeting for, right? And so they're really prioritizing this 90 minutes to dance. And it was really humbling. And one of the most gratifying things as a teacher is when you see this light bulb that goes on for a student. And when they're little, the light bulb is, I did an échappé and I landed 2 feet at the same time in second. And they realize, I can do that. And that's well, that's great. But for the adults, it's I'm honoring myself. I'm doing the thing that I want to do. And there was just so much joy that the idea that I'm just going to pay attention to certain people because they have potential was suddenly ridiculous. I also had to acknowledge I had one student who was so talented. She had beautiful feet and she had this amazing extension, and she'd only had a couple of years of ballet. She just had one of those bodies. And one day I was like, wow, what a shame. You could have been this amazing ballet dancer. And then it turned out she was a neuroscientist and a neurosurgeon. She was an actual brain surgeon. And then I thought, okay, you did pretty well for yourself. You did not waste your life. Oh, and so having that experience teaching adults made me a better teacher, a kinder teacher. It made me offer more to the younger kids because it wasn't about where I thought you would end up in 5 years or 10 years. It's like, what are we doing right now? How can I unlock the joy right now? And then the other thing that happened when I started doing that with the little kids was that I saw how many times I was wrong, how many times I thought a student didn't have potential, but they were so dedicated and they showed up every day and they ended up going to NYU because of their dedication, because of how they paid attention to their bodies, because of their love of dance, really. So it was through teaching adults and then really being addicted to seeing that joy. That's not you. That's the students doing that. And so it's like, okay, I can be a conduit and help these younger dancers unlock that joy.
I love that. I love hearing how adults and the adult dance community is shaping teachers. Because I know, Yelena, you've talked about that too.
Yeah. I remember I was just teaching in the National Ballet School of Cuba, right? Teaching kids, forming them to be professional. My goal was to shape them to apply for the National Ballet, national company. In my mind, never, ever, I never even thought that I will ever teach someone just for fun. Ballet for fun in Cuba doesn't exist. And then I came to this real world and I'm like, wait a moment. There is people that never, ever had the chance. Now they have the money, now they have the time, and it's for fun. To me, oh my God, it was just a new world. It's what you were saying, seeing my students enjoying. Like I had a great time dancing, and every time I went to a stage and I had those claps, and I was just like, the world to me. But seeing my students flourishing and achieving their goals, it's such a different feeling. I feel so proud. I get even tear up sometimes.
Yeah, it's very emotional. And it really is like watching light, and you also see that, especially with adults, they're not performing for you. Whereas a younger dancer is groomed to get attention from the teacher. Oh, good, you did a really good job. And sometimes adults will want that, but they don't need my approval. They're really doing it for themselves. And so you see that, and it is so beautiful.
Yeah, there's something really special about the adult dance classroom, because I'm on the other side of it as a student, but there's a really special energy and community even that happens when you have a group of adults in a ballet studio who are, like you said, they're just there because they love it. They're paying their money. They're carving out the time. They really want to be there. And there's just something really special that happens. So we're glad you love adult dancers as much as we do. We're big fans of them on the podcast. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book was just seeing how your relationship with dance evolved over the course of your professional career and the insights that you share about that journey. And there was two specifically that I'd love to talk to you about. When talking about your time dancing in Italy as a professional, you say, for the first time, my body looked the way I wanted it to look, but only because I felt the way I'd always wanted to feel. And that was just like one of those statements in your book where I was like, oh, I feel that. I feel that. So can you share a little bit more about how your relationship with your body evolved over the course of your career and just that connection between how we feel about ourselves and what we think about ourselves? Because I think that's such a powerful connection, like the feeling and thinking connection. So I would love to just hear more about that idea specifically.
Yeah, it's such a tricky thing because ballet is made up of specific shapes. And so if the passe isn't this shape, it's not a passe anymore, right? So you're trying to conform to this aesthetic, and at the same time you're trying to express something that transcends aesthetics. It's so much greater than a high leg or a bunch of pirouettes or really arched feet, because that's what dance is. It's movement. So growing up in these really rigorous professional training schools, again, like Yelena said, you're trained to say, "Go, it's supposed to hurt. You're supposed to be sad. We're all sad. We come in and we complain about our feet and our bodies, and and we're supposed to be sad. And then we go on stage and we're so full of joy. And then we come off stage and then we feel bad because somebody said something, or you think that somebody saw something, or it didn't go perfect or whatever. So there's this emotional kind of roller coaster. But most of all, if your body hurts, that's ballet. And then I got to Italy, and while the dance world was still that, the ballet world is what it is, the people that I was living with at the time were, when you're hungry, you eat. When you're tired, you sleep. If you're sick, you stay home and you get better. And I realized that I was so used to showing up anyway that I didn't know if I was sick or not. I didn't know if I was tired. I always pretended like I was never hungry. So then I didn't speak the language yet. I didn't have a lot of autonomy. It was kind of like the equivalent of a host family. So I had to do things on someone else's schedule and kind of figure that out. And when I did get sick, the host mother wouldn't let me leave the house. And the doctor came and I had cold medicine and I rested. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. I could just have a cold and stay home. And it was also kind of sad because I was just so disconnected from what my body felt that I couldn't even identify that. And then once I did, I felt amazing. I knew what kind of food my body needed. I knew how much water I need. I could feel it in my body. And I was also dancing. I was in really good shape because I was dancing a lot and rehearsing, and I was dancing with dancers who were better than I was. So I was aspiring to meet their level. And so it kind of snowballed into something from the inside out. I have this inside feeling, which is, again, like that joy, like this joy that's coming out. And I can have the courage to say, oh, I'm not going to do center right now because I can feel there's something wrong with my foot. And I just need to take a break. It's not forever. I'm not injured. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. But this is what I'm feeling right now. And we're taught that you're not supposed to do that, or that's lazy. And it's, again, something that you can do when you're on the other side of it and you're an adult taking class. You can honor all those feelings. You don't have to think that, oh, if I skip this rehearsal, then I won't get cast again. And so I have to dance even when my body's telling me that I need to rest. So it was that kind of nurturing of that mind-body connection that just was like, oh, right. And so now I don't have this disordered eating that is kind of condoned, when you're younger, because I eat because I'm hungry. I eat these foods because they give me energy. I don't eat these foods because I don't feel good after I eat them.
I love that realization happened in Italy, because I just was in Italy. And I'm
Me
like,
too.
man, the Italians just know how to live. The whole time we were there, I was just eating and just felt so good the whole time I was in Italy. And I just felt more beautiful. I felt really healthy. I felt more vibrant. What is it about Italy that just they're doing it right? It's like, yeah, if you're tired, go home and take a nap. It'll be here in a few hours.
Time doesn't exist.
But then you find this rhythm of how we need to be. And then you find that harmony. As a dancer, you're looking for some kind of validation that it's right. And sometimes the mirror is that validation. Sometimes the teacher acts as that validation. Sometimes we are that validation. And the more we have to rely on outside factors, the more filters it goes through, right? And the more opportunities for subjectivity. And so when you can feel it from the inside, then you're like, okay, go. No, I can feel that I'm on my leg in passe. I don't need the mirror. I don't even need the teacher's approval because I can feel that I'm on my leg. And I just did 2 pirouettes, so I know I'm on my leg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even just from a less technical perspective, enjoying dancing more. It reminds me of when how some days you feel really good, and it seems like those are the days when people are complimenting you because you're carrying yourself differently, and there's kind of this, like you said, from the inside out, you feel good and everyone's like, wow, you look really good today. Oh, and it's like this cycle. And I feel like it's a similar idea of when you're feeling settled in your body and you're feeling nourished and you're nurturing your body and you're feeling good, it changes what you're projecting in your dancing. Right. And then it tends to kind of come back to you and like, oh, you are dancing better. It's funny how it's like a domino effect almost.
Right. It's a positive feedback loop, right? And then you do have better coordination. And then your brain is like, oh, those are the muscle patterns. That's the motor pattern that creates this tombe pas de bourrée. And because you're not relying on the mirror or the teacher or your idea of what you did yesterday, then the more we have that positive feedback loop, that it just builds on. And then you have more confidence because you're like, I feel really good about that tombe pas de bourrée. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The second thing that I wanted to ask you about, it was just another one of your insights that you shared that I just felt really like it just hit me. And I was like, oh, this is so good. Love to talk about this. In one of the last chapters, you talk about your experience going to ballet class after retiring from being a professional and having the realization that you said, so what if I don't get noticed in the ballet studio? It's not about being seen. It's about showing yourself. After all, if the sun shines in the forest and there was no one to see it, it still shines. I loved that. So what would you say to adult dancers? Because a lot of adults have never had the professional side of their career. So what would you say to adult dancers who maybe feel like they're not being taken seriously in the studio or even by their own families and communities? I feel like that happens sometimes with adults. People are like, oh, isn't that something that just little kids do? That's kind of weird. You're doing ballet. So people that feel like they're not being taken seriously in their pursuit of ballet, and just any advice you might have for them of how they can hold on to that joy of dancing purely for its own sake that you talked about experiencing for yourself in the studio.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is when you decide to come to class, you've researched what teacher you're going to take from, where your bar is going to be, if you have a setup in your living room, or if you're going to a studio, you know what to do. It's on Tuesday and Thursday nights. So what do you have to do to leave work to get there on time, and what you're going to wear? You're taking yourself seriously, and everything else is just a victory lap. And you're showing up for yourself by doing that. And what's kind of funny about the taking seriously and the experiencing joy, it's kind of like maybe none of us should be taking this seriously. Maybe this should just be joy. And we do it regularly because when we do it regularly, it's easier for our bodies. So there's that part of taking it seriously, so you've paid for your classes. It's every Tuesday and every Thursday, or it's every day or whatever. So that's the taking seriously part. The other part is the joy of dance. I feel like when people don't get what you're doing, that they have their own disconnect. It's their own disconnect between themselves and their joy or their passion, and not being able to say yes to themselves. Like, oh, I could do this too. I don't want to dance. I want to make model trains, or I want to sing, or I want to take an acting class, or I want to learn how to play the violin or something. And it's their own disconnect, because people who do honor that joy, they get it right away. They see it right away. They're like, oh, yeah. I started taking piano just like you're taking your ballet classes. Or let's see, in my area, I'm in Oakland, California, and recently there is a group of middle-aged women who row in the morning, like crew. And
so cool.
It is cool. So when someone else can honor their passion, they see it in you. And when someone doesn't honor their own passion, they just don't get it. But they can be inspired by how you show up for yourself. And so it's really hard when people don't get what you're doing, but you're doing it. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. That's why I love that last part of the quote of, if the sun shines in the forest and no one sees it, it's still shining. Because I think that is so true of the adult ballet journey, really just the adult passion, whatever journey that you have, whether it's rowing or ballet, but it's that idea of just shining for your own sake and without recognition in the traditional way of being on stage and having an audience. And I love what you said too about maybe part of the joy is in not taking it so seriously, because I also think that that's really true. Like, I think there's a lot of truth. I actually just listened to an interview with Chloe Missildine, who was just promoted as a principal dancer of ABT. And it was really funny because she was actually saying that one of the things that her and her friends say to each other when it's like getting really intense in ballet is like, it's just ballet. It's just ballet. And I was like, well, that's really nice to hear, even from a principal of ABT, that it's just ballet. We're not curing cancer. Like, we're not that ballet isn't important. I think we all would agree on the value of ballet and the arts, but it's sometimes I think you have to take the seriousness out of it a little bit.
Right.
And let the joy come through, versus it being this clenching with everything in you of like, oh, it must be perfect.
Yeah. No. We're dancing.
That's what happened in class every time. I tell all the students, everyone wants the perfect grand plie or the perfect combination in the center. And I'm like, you need to let go. Stop thinking of the technique and stop stressing yourself. Just let go. You already at this point created a muscle memory for that exercise. Just listen to the music, go with the flow. It's just dancing, have fun. And it's so interesting. For us, I can imagine, like for me, it was so scary after I just retired 5 years ago. And I haven't been only to one ballet class in person with someone else. And I joined this group and I felt that I had to shine for everyone else and everyone had to see me. And it was so scary because I was like, what if I don't get the double pires to both sides? I was just like, no one did care that much as I was caring. And I just stressed out so much rather than from the first second I just step on the classroom. Just have fun. That's what I was there for. And I didn't even think of it once I was there. I was like, oh no, it needs to be perfect. And forgot to have fun.
It's so funny too, because it's like we were talking about earlier. Those are the times when you tend to dance better anyway. When you feel good on the inside and you're having fun. Like actually, it's funny, even just this morning, I had one of those classes where I was just having a really good time in class today. And I feel like I danced better because I was having a good time. So one of the things that I would love to just hear from you, because you have had a career in the ballet world, is in what ways have you seen things change over the course of your time as a student into professional life, now being retired? I know in the book you talk about having children that did ballet. And so you've really had this ability to kind of see into the world over a long period. So I'd love to hear what you've seen change or evolve, for better or worse.
Right. So what has changed a lot is just how we understand what it means to have a healthy body. So when I was growing up, a healthy body meant that you weren't anorexic and you didn't have a sprained ankle, right? The idea that disordered eating was a problem was not on anyone's radar. The idea that you were dancing through injury to the point where someone's Achilles tendon would snap was not preventative. The idea that there was preventative care around taking care of a body was just not a concept that people understood. I remember trying to figure out, like, how can I get higher extensions? How can I have better coordination? And I started going to yoga class, and I didn't tell anybody because that was like sacrilege. You didn't do Pilates, or yoga or anything.
We couldn't even bike. I wasn't allowed to get on a bicycle because my quads were meant to grow in a different position that it has to be elongated for ballet.
Right. So that there could be any kind of cross training meant that you were, cheating in some way, which of course from a physical standpoint is just ridiculous, especially if you look at what a body needs. If you're always in external rotation, then there are some things that are stretched out. You think you're more flexible, but it's really just a stretched out ligament, right? So the more information you have around anatomy and other modalities that are around strength training and flexibility, then the stronger you can be in the studio, right? And then you can have your own preventative care. You don't actually have to sit out because you just didn't push it, or you recognize nothing's going on right now, but I do need to ice. So I didn't have any chronic injuries when I was a dancer. Part of it that was because of my secret yoga classes and different cranial sacral therapy and things like that for muscles and massage, just regular things like that that I had to hide that are now kind of normal, right? Now Pilates will be part of your body conditioning, or yoga, or you'll have a teacher who will have you do a downward dog in the middle of bar because it's good stretching. Also, just awareness around mental health for athletes and for dancers. There's the idea that you could have heights in a different color, the skin color. That's just a way of being more inclusive of like who has access to dance.
Mm-hmm.
And that has changed a lot in my lifetime. So before you would have, if you were a person of color, then you're going to get all the exoticized roles, right? You're going to be Arabian in Nutcracker, or you're going to be Chinese, or all this kind of stuff, or you're going to be the Midnight Fairy because you're kind of brown or something. And that still kind of happens, but that's not normalized anymore, right?
Yeah.
So that has changed, and I think that's really great because it just means that ballet is broader. Choreographically, we're not stuck just doing ballet steps. There's a lot more movement that would have been thought of as contemporary when I was dancing. That's just part of how choreography is, even if it doesn't have a French name to it. So things that are, I would say, maybe more problematic than when I was dancing, I would say the effect of social media.
Mm-hmm.
So you see people who are hypermobile and they just might have joints that are like that. Or maybe they are actually harming themselves, but you can't tell. You just see somebody on a foam roller in an oversplit on a reel that gets played over and over.
Making it the norm. They're just making that
right.
norm. And that's not true.
That's right, exactly. And that has nothing to do with dance, right? Mm-hmm. That's a body, that's a position. It's not always true that someone who's hypermobile is coordinated or can jump, right? Because you're concentrating on one thing about flexibility instead of where your center of gravity is as you're moving. And it certainly is really disconnected from joy, right? The joy of dance, so the joy of, interpreting movement and things like that. So I feel like social media in that way really does a disservice because it makes it look like, as you said, it's kind of normalizing certain shapes and certain body types, and that's just not, that's kind of going backwards.
Yeah, it's like extremes, I think, are getting presented as normal or as attainable or even desirable, Because I think some of, like you said, it's like, this isn't even healthy. Like, this isn't even good for your body. But it's, you see it on social media and you think, oh gosh, am I supposed to be able to do that?
Right. And then that detaches you from that connection, that mind-body connection of what my body can do. Because now I'm looking at, it's like another measure of what external validation could look like. Oh, I don't fit this picture. So I'm imagining someone else thinking that I don't fit this picture. And that's just not dance. It's just not dance.
We call it, in Cuba, we call it circus. Seriously. Right. That's a joke. I remember we had this, she was 2 years younger than me. She's living in US at the moment, if I'm not wrong. She's dancing. I remember her being able to do 20 pirouettes. Seriously, on point. And she was like so young. I forgot her name. And I remember her doing 20 pirouettes on point to her good side. And I remember at the beginning of realizing how good she was on her turns, how Fernando Alonso, I remember him trying to get her to realize, look, you have a great skill on you. Now we need to hone that into a technical movement that doesn't look like circus. So I do remember my teachers, like, we're going to use it and we're going to use it right. It's not that you just go there and do your 20 pirouettes with your passe, cross and whatever. No, we're going to get it. And I remember him praising it, but praising it every time she did it correctly. But I do remember that how my teachers insisted, like, we're just going to be dancers. 3 pirouettes is perfect. By doing 3 perfect pirouettes, that's fine. Even a simple pirouette. Like, how many times do I insist all my students? 1 simple pirouette with control is harder to do than double pirouette with lots of dynamic and lots of like, okay, show me the video. I just want to make sure that it's something that will actually help you to build strength. It's so hard. Right now, I'm happy for social media to be there because something that has been amazing with dancers is now everyone can see any great dancer from any part of the world, right? You just don't need to go only to the theater to see them. They get popularity, and it's a little bit easier for us as a dancers now to make a living because it's not just through the theater. However, it's recognizing the actual quality of those videos, and young dancers are having quite trouble trying to filter what is adequate for them. And I present that for adults. as well. Like they know a little bit of ballet, but they don't really know what can actually help them and what is right and what isn't.
Right.
Like they get this idea of like, oh my God, if I don't do a perfect split, then I cannot do an arabesque. And I'm like, no, you can definitely do an arabesque within your own range of motion.
Yeah.
Like it's possible.
Yeah, it's so hard to translate what you see in either an image or a very short clip into the entirety of ballet and artistry and all the other things that really make full performance, like the things that are going to make a full performance amazing, are going to be totally different from what's going to make a viral 10-second clip on YouTube. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. Right.
in some ways it's hard. So one of the things that I'm also curious to know is just how your ballet career and background and training has influenced now this new part of your journey as a writer. And I guess maybe how long have you been a writer? Because this is the first book I've read of yours, but have you been writing for a while?
So I was probably maybe the adult ballet equivalent as a writer. So I've always been a writer. I've always written, right? When I was in Italy, I would write these stories that would happen because it was like I was this fish out of water, and there were so many things that didn't make sense to me. So I wrote it all down, but I didn't know how to revise my stories. I didn't know how to submit my stories. And then about 14 years ago, I was like, okay, I have to figure this out. I have to figure out what real writers do. And so to do that, I'm going to model that off of what I did as a dancer that felt like success to me. So what did I do as a dancer? I made sure that I found a community. I found people who were better than I was, and I hung around them. I looked for, I want to say, the right fit. But what I mean by that is I did the equivalent of auditioning, right? For a writer, that's submissions. And as a dancer, I auditioned, I don't know, maybe 20 companies a year. I was always auditioning. I was always looking for, jobs that would have the right, just quality of life, balancing quality of life with how I wanted to be as a dancer. So I was always auditioning, and there's a lot of rejection in that. But there's also a lot of finding the right fit, because sometimes I'd audition for a company and I would see a power dynamic between a director and a dancer, and it would be a red flag, like, oh, I could work here, but this is not, it's not even a matter of being happy. It's a matter of this is not a good environment.
Yeah.
So what that means is that you kind of hone what's a good fit for you, and you get used to rejection, and it's not personal. Mm-hmm. So as a writer, I send my work out, and sometimes it's not a good fit. And sometimes I know it's not a good fit, but I send it out anyway, because sometimes something happens. I will meet someone else because I made the submission, or the editor will come back and say, we like this, but could you add some stuff? So my dance career taught me how to put myself out there. It taught me that it's not personal if someone doesn't like my work. Which is much easier as a writer than as a dancer. Because as a writer, it's like out there. As a dancer, it's you. You are the work that doesn't work. And I learned to show up every day. Right? This is like as a dancer. You don't feel like dancing, but you show up. You don't hurt yourself, but you still come to class. And you still write. Mm-hmm. And it also gave me a sense of, this is something that other writers don't get, but as a dancer, especially as a performer, you know that something happens when it gets over-rehearsed. It's about to be over-rehearsed. You need to do the break. And I can feel that with my writing. I can feel like, okay, this is almost over-revised, and I just need to give it some time. And sometimes it means I just have to send it out to like a friend, or I just have to print it out. And it's just like a feeling of the magic of art and creativity that I wouldn't see it if I were just a writer. I only see it because I know what it's like to be a dancer. And I know that, like, okay, I had a director would say, it's time to give it to Jesus. And, so, but it did. It somehow, it comes together in some magic way.
Yeah, I would imagine the the need to be very self-motivated is probably similar in both fields. Like you're saying, just having to show up every day and having to be so self-motivated to audition and do all these things. And now as a writer, like when I think about writing as a career, I'm like, man, that has got to be so challenging on certain days to just like make yourself get on your computer and just sit down and start writing.
But there's still that joy. You're like, oh, this story came out, or this memory surfaced, or, oh, that is what it was like to be a little kid looking at the stage. Okay, I wrote that sentence. Okay, that works. Or that doesn't quite work, but we'll come back tomorrow because it still needs some help. But if I tinker with it, it'll be a sprained ankle of a sentence. So
yeah,
let it.
Yeah, it's funny. We've talked about that even. I can't remember if we did a podcast episode on this, but I know Yelena and I have talked about that, about how you can overdo it even with like learning. I've never performed for ballet, but even just in practice, it's like we've talked about how at a certain point, for pirouettes, for example, you hit this point where you're like, this is no longer productive practice.
Right.
I'm just getting frustrated. It's getting worse. So I need to just take a minute, step back. So it's funny to hear there's kind of an equivalent of that even with the writing process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think for our last question, we ask anyone who comes to be a guest on our podcast this one, and it's always fun to see what the answer is going to be. So the final question is, if you could have coffee with any dancer, living or dead, who would it be and why?
Well, I have two answers. So my dancer answer is David Howard, who had the David Howard Center in New York for many, many years. And it was like an open class, and you could come in, and Baryshnikov might be taking class. And he just did something that just felt like magic. And he had a very particular set of the way his bar was laid out. It was always the same way. You always had this port de bras after this tendu combination. And in those classes, I would get so warm and so cold. It was just like I was just a better dancer. And I remember trying to dissect, like, what did he do? What did he do? What was different? What's the music? So I would like to have coffee with him and say, what did you do?
Yeah, what was the magic?
Right, exactly. But if I had to just pick one, it wouldn't be David Howard. It would be the director that is in my book. So her name is Ingeborg Heuser, and she was born in Berlin in, she would be 100 now, so 1924. And she comes of age in Berlin, World War II. She's dancing for the Deutsche Berlin Oper. She's a soloist, but she's still very young. She's actually dancing for Hitler because that's the national company in Berlin, right? And that's the guy in charge at the time. And ballet is very elevated in all of this. And then World War II hits. So she makes her way to the States via Italy. And so I know these snippets of stories. And you can imagine how someone in that, this is someone who had been much worse than like the needle and the lighter and the cane.
Yeah.
And, this is someone who had lots of insults and things like that. But was still a very creative person. And growing up, it's not that I didn't know to appreciate that this is someone who has a lot of stories about the world, about art, about what happens when you have to run from your country. And you come to a country where, when she came to the United States, nobody wanted anything to do with it. She had to pretend she was French because nobody wanted Germans. So I know some of these stories, and some of them are things that my friends and I kind of pasted together from other stories. And so I would love to sit down with her, and I would just say, tell me your stories. I want to know what did you do in Italy? We heard you were a movie star, but that couldn't have been possible. What did you do? Or were you a movie star? Tell me all your stories.
Yeah, she's to me, having read the book, it's like she's a character in the book, but you knew her like she was a very real person in your life, but she was such a enigma in the book. It was funny because just the parts that you would share about her, because she kind of was in and out throughout your career when you'd come back to El Paso. And it was always like every time she would kind of come back into a scene in the book, I was like, oh, what's it going to be? Sometimes she was brutal, and then you'd have these moments where there was like a tenderness would kind of come through. And I was, as a reader, she was so interesting as like a character, but I'm sure having known her as a person, just how fascinating that must have been.
Absolutely. And then also coming of age at a time when, the sequins were hand sewn on the costumes. And, she brought a tutu back from Berlin and told the costume designer, like, this is a tutu, figure it out. Right. And the costume designer, reverse engineered this German engineering tutu,
Oh my God.
that somehow made its way from Berlin to El Paso. Amazing stories and creativity and drive and damage too,
Yeah, and it's like, it reminds me of that saying, hurt people. And she was so brutal to you guys. Like, some of the things that you say that she said, I was like, oh my God. But it's like, you just have to wonder about her own journey and her upbringing and her own life and what she lived through, that would make you say some of those things to children.
I know.
It's wild. But yeah, so fascinating. And I think something that happens, as you age and become an adult, is you start thinking of people more as the sum of their life story, and just like really wanting to understand. I think that's something that we can't always appreciate as kids, the people in our lives. We just are thinking of the immediacy of our own relationship to them. But as an adult, it's like, wow, tell me about your life.
Absolutely right. I can contextualize, what you went through and what you brought to us, because she did give us a layer of artistry. She did teach us a layer of artistry that I didn't get in any other school, just something that she demonstrated for us. So yeah, but again, the stories, what was it like to go from upper middle class German life to rebel, realizing I have to get out of here.
Yeah, then ending up in El Paso, Texas, from Germany, to El Paso, Texas. People's individual journeys are just so fascinating. Thank you so much for being on and for sharing your story and your insights.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun for me, Yelena and Hannah, to talk both ballet and writing.
Such a great book.
Would you mind real quick telling our listeners where they can purchase the book, how they can connect with you if you have a website or social media, anything like that?
Yes. So my website is JanineKovac.com. The book is available wherever books are sold. You can ask them to order it, or online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And yeah, you can find me at Janine Kovac on Instagram and Janine Kovac Writer on Facebook.
Perfect. We'll put all that information so that you guys can get your own copies. It's really, really fun and just very authentic. I loved what you shared. I think any dancer will really enjoy this look into professional life and just all of the insights that you gleaned over the course of your career. So thank you so much.
Thank you again for having me and letting me talk ballet and book and everything else.
Thank you for listening to After Class with Ballet for All.
Join the community on YouTube and Instagram, or come dance with us, our weekly Zoom classes for adult ballerinas like you.
Links included in the episode description. Special thank you to our sponsors.
See you next time after class. Podcast produced by Mission Bridge Media.